A strange day in July. Tommy knew he was going to hate going on vacation with his family this year. Grandpa Joe was Tommy's favorite adult. He always came with Tommy's family on summer vacation road trips. He would sneak Tommy extra dessert at restaurants and make silly faces behind Mom and Dad's backs. Grandpa Joe would also teach Tommy all the things adults aren't supposed to teach kids, like how to fart and blame someone else, and how to start fires. He always seemed to have the exact right thing they needed for the activity at hand. If there was an arcade game, he always had quarters. If there was a stuffy usher at the theater, he always had a straw and some spitballs. He'd ask Tommy if he needed a breath mint, and if he said yes, Grandpa Joe would pull one out of his pocket. He sometimes took Tommy to the mall, where they ate junk food and played hide and seek in the clothes displays. Grandpa Joe was like a big kid. All the fun stuff. But Grandpa Joe got sick at the end of May. The other adults wouldn't give Tommy any details other than, he's old, so he takes longer to get better when he's sick. But Grandpa Joe didn't get better. He stopped calling each weekend. He didn't email funny memes. Tommy overheard his parents one night talking about how Grandpa Joe was in the hospital and that he wasn't getting better. In the middle of June, Tommy's parents sat him and his little sister Annie down on the living room couch. He could see his parents looked sad. Their downcast eyes and dark circles under them reminded him of actors on TV who were going through bad times. "Kids," their dad began slowly, "Grandpa Joe isn't doing very well." Mom began crying softly. "He's asked that we bring you guys to the hospital to see him one last time." Later, outside the hospital room, the doctor spoke to the family. Tommy didn't remember most of what he told them. Something about not long now and mostly sleeping. Mom held Annie, who was fussing because she was immature. Tommy walked into the room while they talked. Tommy felt like he'd been hit by a truck. Grandpa Joe was the strongest man he'd ever seen. But not now. Grandpa Joe had tubes everywhere. There were machines beeping loudly, and Tommy recognized a slow, steady heartbeat. Grandpa looked like a thin ghost. His arms, which used to be muscly and powerful, were like thin sticks. His face, which used to be grizzled and mischievous, was now ashen and gray. It made Tommy feel sick to see his hero lying there with his eyes closed. And then they opened. Grandpa Joe's eyes fluttered open and slowly focused on the quivering little boy at the foot of his bed. They got wide when he realized it was Tommy, and the faint flicker of a smile danced on his lips. "Tommy, you came," he whispered raspily. Tommy swallowed thickly. "Grandpa Joe, are you awake?" Grandpa Joe raised his head, but just barely. "Tommy, quick, reach into my jacket pocket and take out the bag." Tommy looked around and saw Grandpa Joe's jacket hanging on the wall. He slowly walked towards it and tentatively reached inside. He felt a velvet sack. As he drew it out, he could see that it was velvet, a rich purple velvet, and it was heavier than expected. He looked puzzlingly at his hero. Grandpa Joe was full-on smiling now. He continued with a raspy voice, but it had more life in it than a few moments ago. There was even the mischievous sparkle in his eye that Tommy always knew meant something fun was about to happen. Does this mean that they were about to go on an adventure? "Tommy, I want you to have what's inside. My grandfather gave it to me, and I'm giving it to you. You're about to start in an amazing adventure. You'll need what's inside." And then, just like that, Grandpa Joe leaned back onto his pillow. His face relaxed, and it was as if nothing in the past 2 minutes had happened. Mom gasped in the hallway, and everyone standing outside came bustling into the room. Dad exclaimed how they didn't know where Tommy had gone and how irresponsible it was for him to have run off like that. The doctor checked Grandpa Joe's machines and murmured to himself and checked off things on his clipboard. The family stayed for a while, but Grandpa Joe didn't wake for any of them. The bag that Tommy had hastily jammed into his jacket pocket seemed lighter than before. Tommy rubbed it, loving the soft velvet brush against his fingers. Mom and Dad whispered some words into Grandpa Joe's ears, and then they went home. Tommy still had the bag in his pocket when they went to the funeral at the end of June. He refused to open it up, but carried it everywhere. He secretly hoped Grandpa Joe would call or show up or email and tell him it had all been a joke and that he wanted the bag back. And then came the day when Mom and Dad announced that they were going to take the family on a road trip. Tommy was livid. In his head he screamed, "How could they? What about Grandpa Joe?" But kids can't tell adults what to do. So the family loaded up the car and set out to somewhere that Tommy didn't care about without the person he cared most about. He knew he was going to hate going on vacation with his family this year. They drove for about 4 days in a row, away from all the noise of the city, into the empty highways, through the expanse of the desert, and then, finally, to a forest in the middle of nowhere. When they pulled into what appeared to be a secluded campsite, Dad told Tommy and Annie to go exploring. Tommy, wearing a light summer jacket, reached into his pocket as he walked towards the sounds of lapping water. His hand touched the soothing velvet of the bag. He decided that if he found water, he'd throw the bag into it, letting it disappear forever. It just reminded him of his grandpa. He walked through the trees with purpose. Annie followed behind, chasing butterflies and dancing in flowers. When they passed the edge of the trees, a large glittering lake appeared, spreading out before them like a magical mirror. Water gently lapped against the shore, and gulls screeched in the distance. This was a calm place. Tommy took the bag out. He felt its warmth and remembered holding Grandpa Joe's hand as they had once walked along a lake. Grandpa Joe had rocks that he used to teach Tommy to skip in the water. With tears forming in his eyes, Tommy looked around for a rock to throw. There were none. He really wanted a couple of rocks to throw. And then something happened. The bag in his hand began to move on its own. He dropped it to the ground quickly, thinking some wild animal had crawled inside when he wasn't looking. The bag fell with a thud and the drawstring around the opening widened. Tommy could see that there was something dull and gray inside. He reached in and felt the smooth hardness of a rock. He pulled it out and saw that it was a perfect skipping stone, just like Grandpa Joe used to always have. He looked down at the bag and opened it up all the way. There was another rock and nothing else. He took the first rock and threw it, just like Grandpa Joe had taught him, and it skipped once and sank. He took the second rock and threw it a little bit harder this time, and it skipped 3 times before entering the water. As the last rock sunk into the darkness, Tommy began to cry. Softly at first, and then increasingly louder. He fell to his knees in front of the bag, his tears falling inside. His anger at being abandoned grew until he finally threw his head back and screamed, "I need you, Grandpa Joe," he wailed. He crumpled into a heap and sobbed for what seemed like hours. After a while, his cries softened and his tears dried up. Annie came skipping up to his still form and smiled at him. "Hey, silly, can I have that rock?" She grinned and pointed at the ground in front of him. Irritated by her lack of empathy, he was about to growl at her to go away when the open mouth of the bag caught his eyes. There was another rock inside. How? It was completely empty after he took out the first 2 rocks. He was sure of it. He picked it up. It was the same smooth hardness as the first 2. But what was this? It had writing on one side. The writing familiar, and then he almost dropped it when he remembered where he had seen it before. It was Grandpa Joe's handwriting. He used to write Tommy letters in a lazy, scrawling handwriting before he finally learned to send emails. But how could this be? It's time to say goodbye, Tommy. That's all the message said. Amazed, Tommy looked at it one more time before turning to the lake. He threw with all his might, but the third stone came skipping back. It came with such a force that it almost hit him and Annie. He picked it up in astonishment and turned it over, and the writing had changed. You can't have me back, Tommy. The bag's abilities are powerful, but there are some things it can't do. Start your adventure. I hope it brings you as much joy as it did to me. I love you. And the initials G.J. And as if it was a trick of the light, the writing faded as soon as Tommy read it. Tommy! Annie whined. Can I please has the rock? Tommy, startled back to the present, handed it to her without thinking. She squealed with delight and threw it awkwardly into the water. It made a big splash and was gone. She looked at him with a big grin. Can I has another one? He picked up the bag off the dirty ground. He thought about how he would love to keep her so happy. It lifted his spirits so much to bring happiness to this little kid. If only he had another rock. And the bag shifted in his hand. With his eyes widening in understanding, he reached inside and took out a fourth rock. He handed it to her, and she ran towards the water. His eyes sparkling mischievously, he called after her. Hey, Annie, do you want a breath mint? And the soft, velvety bag shifted again inside his warm hand.